So thanks everyone for coming out. So we have Permjot here today. He basically needs no introduction, but he he is an angel investor. He is on our new executive council that we'll be piloting out tomorrow. And he has a lot of insights on how we can plan for now amidst the COVID-19 outbreaks. And so he's been running this webinar a few times, but he wants to make this one a bit more specific to Charlottetown, which is why we've been doing this in coordination with the Chamber of Commerce. So I'll kind of let Permjot take that away. Like I said in the chat, if you guys have questions throughout the webinar, send them through there, and then I'll kind of relay those to Permjot throughout. But yeah, other than that, I think we might get started on some quick introductions, and then I think Permjot said from there we'll just kind of go and mute our mics, let him take control, and then we'll do the questions periodically if that works. Yeah.
Great. Do you want to do the introductions? How are we going to do this?
Do you want to just go through one by one and say our name and where we're from, position? For example, I'm Rachel. I'm the marketing and events coordinator at Startup Zone.
I'm Permjot. I'm running the presentation.
I'm Redden. I'm the startup services coordinator here at Startup Zone.
Excellent. I'm Patrick Farrar. I'm the CEO over here at the Startup Zone, working from home.
I'm Erin Rober. I'm the operations manager here at the Startup Zone. Sorry, Colton, I saw you going for it.
No rush. Colton Handeran from Golden Custom in Charlottetown.
We can start going down the list. Kelly, did you want to?
Sure, I wasn't sure if my list is in the same order as anybody else's. Anyway, Kelly Galloway with Septic Sitter. Hi, Permjot.
Good to see you again, Kelly.
Pat Sebastian.
Hey, I run Sebastian Business Development Consulting. Do a lot of growth coaching at the Startup Zone, general malcontent, and a fan of Mr. Valia over here.
Excellent.
Good taste. Good taste.
Anyone else? Xinjuan Li. Sorry for mispronouncing that. Did you want to introduce yourself?
We don't have to do this. Shall we just, if anybody wants to introduce themselves, they can.
Absolutely.
Shall we do that? So I'll just get started because I think also we'll have a lot of people joining us in and out. Now, if you could turn your microphones to mute, given that this is informal and this is, and we're all friends, and I've been lucky enough to do a lot of work with the Startup Zone. If you do have questions that are pertinent, please just unmute and ask the question, or as suggested by Rachel, if you just want to text with Rachel, that I won't have sight of the text though. So if you do have a thing, Rachel, just feel free to interrupt at any moment to say, could you answer this question, etc. So I'm going to get going with this, if that's okay. And please do let us know if you can't hear me, or I'm speaking too fast, or you don't understand my accent, whatever, let us know. We want to make this as interactive and useful for you as possible. So what I'm going to cover today is, obviously we're dealing with a wow thing. So we're going to talk about how do we deal with right now. I'm going to talk about, well, how could we look at the landscape, and I'm going to talk about a tool called Steeple. Some people call it Pestle, some people call it Pest. I'm going to talk about how we can use that. And really what I want to do is also talk about how we turn those plans that we do through this workshop, how we turn them into actions, because ultimately it's all about being able to act. So the most important thing about dealing with now is some golden rules. One thing is you've got to deal with effectiveness rather than efficiency. So normally when we're doing business meetings, we are driven by efficiency. We'd have metrics, and the metrics are all about how many appointments have you done? How many of this have you done? What's your conversion ratio? What's that? Right now, I would not focus on any of that. Right now, I would simply focus on what are the right things to do, not are we doing things the right way? So it's all about, are we doing the right things? So what things are needed to move your organization forward? Focus on that. Don't worry about the efficiency and the metrics. We can catch up afterwards, but we need to survive first. The other thing I want to do is make sure we understand stress and take a robust scientific model around stress and think about the causes of stress and what we can do to reduce that. I'm actually qualified in organizational stress management because I noticed that when I was heading up a team at EY in London, the team often didn't perform as effectively as it could if it was stressed. And when you take when people are underperforming because of stress, simply asking them to work harder makes things worse because you're actually exacerbating the stress. Whereas if you actually tackle the stress, you get far better performance in your team. And then really my advice is to use those mechanisms around stress as the bedrock for communication with key staff and key suppliers. And the other key point that we're going to talk about briefly is cash is king. Now, I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff today. I'm going to be going at a very fast pace. I hope everybody's okay with that. I am doing more and more work for Startup Zone this week and next week. And as Rachel mentioned, I'm going to be involved in the Executive Council. So if anybody wants to spend any time with me, please, please, please do get in touch with Rachel or Erin or Pat Sebastian, anybody, and we will try and help you as best we can. So what causes stress? There's a model called CUSP. CUSP, it looks at the 4 things that really lead to stress, and that is loss of control, increased uncertainty, lack of support, and too much pressure. So when we talk about these things, broadly, what you need to do is give people more control. You need to give them plans, you need to give them the actions you need to undertake, but you need to give people a sense of control. Because what really causes stress is a loss of control. A loss of control over your daily routine, a loss of control over just little things like being able to go to an office, having lunch at a certain place, going to Starbucks, doing this, doing that, all of these things, knowing what you have to do at work, knowing what customers you have to do, what your metrics are, knowing you're going to get paid on this date, etc. All of this lack of control we have is creating stress. Uncertainty, none of us know what's going on. We are dealing with a very, very fluid and rapidly changing dynamic, and we are also absorbing a lot of information from loads of different sources. Some of that information is contradictory, so we are suffering from that high level of uncertainty. But what we can do with control is give people more control, as I mentioned. With uncertainty, what you can do is continue to communicate. The number one thing you need to do in crisis management is communicate effectively, clearly, and in a timely manner, and truthfully. What you also need to do is stress is often caused by feeling there isn't support around you. There is a lot of support, but unlike normal times, we have to ask for that support and we have to articulate the support we need. So what I'd encourage all of you to do, whether you're a sole trader, whether you're an entrepreneur, or whether you're running a business with many employees, I would encourage you to communicate what support you need and what support, encourage people to let you know what support other people need. The other thing we need to do is identify the sources of pressure on you and people around you, and the steps you can take to increase your ability to deal with the source of pressure. Often dealing with stress is you can't often remove the sources of pressure, especially in these macro things where the stress and the pressure is huge, and we can't actually mitigate the sources of pressure, but what we can do and what we have a responsibility to do, certainly in the UK it's the law, employers have a responsibility to increase people's ability to deal with the sources of pressure. So I want to give you examples of all of them. Control. So staff are working from home, that's great, but you need to give them too much freedom can be very stressful, as well as not having enough freedom. So you as a CEO, as a leader, you need to make sure you've got that balance right between the amount of control, and this is for individuals as well. I do this exercise myself where I felt in the first working from home couple of weeks, I just felt it was a bit of a whirlwind. And now I've suddenly created a forced routine where at 9 o'clock I have to do something, I have to go for a walk for an hour, I have to schedule that in the diary, because I found now having control over my day has reduced my stress levels. Just little things like scheduling and not just sitting on the sofa with your laptop in your pajamas working all day. yes, you're working, but you're really not taking care of yourself. Because the other thing I need to mention to everybody is, this is more like the 2008 financial crash rather than the 9/11 example that people often cite. With 9/11, it was a sprint, it was a crisis. With 2008, it was a marathon. This is going to be a marathon, so you have to, and we'll talk more about this, you have to make sure you have the energy to survive. Some staff will want to work in an office or an office-like environment. Can you accommodate them? Is Startup Zone still open? If it is, can you enable certain people who want to work in that office to be able to work there? Now, for a lot of startups, this doesn't apply, but some of you will employ teams of more than 4. If you do, I would encourage you to develop little cells of 4 people at a time, like little groups of 4. Encourage them to kind of take care of each other and look out for each other. That's very, very important, that you create these groups that have a responsibility of looking out for each other. And also recognize that you need to give people time off during working from home. So make it part of the day that there is a lunch hour, and that people are expected during their lunch hour to have some exercise. Have they gone for a walk? Have they done something? Again, very important that this is a marathon or a sprint. Having staff who have burnt out is no good to you. Uncertainty. Can't stress enough the need to communicate. Now, be clear around your priorities. I've listed them in a particular order: employees, shareholders, customers, bank. Your priorities may be completely different. Your shareholders may be the very last ones, your banks may be the first one, whatever. But be clear in your communication and in your planning around who are your most important people to engage with. Right now, it may well be shareholders and banks, or it may be customers if you actually have revenue paying customers. You need to share constantly information around scenarios with them. You need to give them information about post-crisis, what your plan is after this. Now, the worst thing any of you can assume is that in a couple of months, it will be business as usual. It won't. And we're going to go through an analysis. The steeple analysis exercise is about recognizing how the world is changing, how your business model may have to change to accommodate that. And you need to give staff and others around you, other stakeholders, comfort, but you cannot give them false comfort. You will absolutely be caught out if you lie or you tell them something which you knew to not be true. One of the things is, one of the reasons why it's important to communicate is most people will imagine worst case scenarios in their head. There's this very strong correlation between your level of IQ and the level of depression you're likely to feel, because if you are very, very intelligent, you tend to spend a lot of time with yourself and you tend to think the worst and create the worst case scenarios. So one of the things we found in a company that I'm involved in, we communicated that if X, Y, and Z were to happen, it was an English company, which is why we said Z rather than Z. But if we said, if these 3 things were to happen, we would have these cuts in salaries made across the board. And the salary, it wasn't as straightforward. It worked out roughly 15% each, but the top management, they took a 25 to 30% cut. People on the very lowest levels took 0 cut at all. We felt we couldn't cut their wages. But overall, throughout the organization, there were cuts announced only if X, Y, and Z happened. The impact of that was weird. Morale actually went up because people were, it was made very clear that no one was being laid off. Even in the worst case scenario in this organization, no one was being laid off. And it just took care of people because they just thought, right, the worst isn't going to happen. We know we're going to survive and we're going to get through this. Now we talk about support. I would encourage you to encourage banter on communication channels. Now, if you're on your own, if you're an entrepreneur working on your own, one of the things Startup Zone may want to do is, it may well be doing this already, but I think it's very important that at 10:30 or 11 o'clock every morning, you have a half an hour coffee. I'm having loads of meetings with people where I'm having coffee at 11 o'clock, 10:30. I get my coffee cup, they get their coffee cup, and we do a Zoom call. The first time you do it, it's a bit weird because you're like, like the way we were doing introductions, whose turn is it to talk? you'll get used to it. You'll overcome that. It's new technology. We'll get used to it. And it's very important you feel in touch with people, and you talk about Netflix, any good TV you've seen recently. On Thursday, for example, I'm actually part of a panel where we're talking about books we've read at 5:30. I can send you details if anyone's interested. But we're just talking about books. There's a panel of 3 people, and we're just talking about books we've read and things we've enjoyed. Nothing to do with COVID-19, but just talking about stuff we've done, and that is very, very useful because you've got to create a sense of normal. You can't just be permanently in crisis mode all the time. We'll be exhausted. Okay, your nerves will be shot to pieces. So do set up through Startup Zone or yourselves just an 11 o'clock. This is the Zoom link every day. Just bring your coffee and chat for 15 minutes. Hey, how's everything? Any good TV to recommend? Any good books, etc. Encourage two-way communications, like I said, in terms of support that you need and support being offered. And then understand and try to develop solutions for sources of anxiety that many of you will feel outside of work. So one of the things we've done as a family, Sandra and I, we found that a lot of our stress actually came from having kids at the home. I don't know if any others of you have children, but suddenly your days are, the kids are going to bed very late, then they wake up, they're having breakfast when you're having lunch, or some occasions when we're having early dinner. And it just throws everything off. So what we're doing is we've actually developed solutions where we've actually ordered loads of pre-made food. And if anybody wants anything, the kitchen is open at these times. Other than that, it's closed. That way we're increasing, if you think about sources of stress, we're increasing control. We've got rid of uncertainty. These are the kitchen hours. If you want to eat anything outside of those hours, here's the help it yourself stuff. Little things like that make a big, big difference to your ability to actually get on with work and handle stress. What you can't be is a 24-hour kitchen service. Rachel, everything good? Any questions or anything?
Nothing so far. But if anyone does have anything, feel free to send it in now.
Good.
Awesome. Yeah, nothing so far.
I'll mention we have stand-up zone at the Startup Zone every Wednesday at 11 a.m. So if anyone wants to take part in that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's exactly the kind of thing we should be doing.
And taking existing, events that you're doing, like group gatherings, and just making them digital. I know, Aaron, you have a exciting one on Wednesday evenings, if you want to share that.
I sure do. So Wednesday night, I get together with my girlfriends, and we all cross stitch. Took a cross stitching class together. So we get together and digitally cross stitch for about an hour or so and chat and catch up and just socialize.
Very important. Very, very important. Can't stress that enough. So that was who? That was
Aaron Robar.
Aaron, sorry, I didn't see you. Yeah, everyone's videos, which is fine. But yeah, thank you, Aaron. Very, very handy. Make sure you're not alone. Really make sure you're not alone. So pressure, what can you do to reduce pressure? Well, firstly, understand your sources of pressure, acknowledge them and address them. And then what can you do to increase your ability and people's ability to deal with pressure? Well, this is why we do training. If I ask any of you to do a very complicated job, you will feel stressed, you will feel pressurized. But what you do is you train your team, you train yourself. If you've got some spare time because of the conditions you find yourself under right now, what can you be trained on so that you can actually withstand pressure later on? Break down tasks. Again, if you think about sales, you would never give somebody an annual sales target and remind them of the annual sales target on a daily basis. Give them a daily activity thing, which leads to the breaking down of that huge annual target into discrete parcels of actions they need to undertake. People can cope with that. People can't cope with big numbers. So just think about that as a pressure, and really think about the training you're offering, etc. So what are the immediate actions you should take? You do need to have a sense of controlled panic. If you exude the level of calm that Pat Farrar always exudes, people aren't going to believe you, or people are going to think you're detached from the real world. So what you do need to do is you need to have a level of panic, but it needs to be controlled. By that, I mean, you need to acknowledge and recognize and communicate, yeah, things aren't normal. This is not normal, but we have a plan. We will get through this, okay? And so it's about communicating that. If you try to exude total and utter calmness, people will think something's wrong. You'll actually increase their stress levels. And if you think of, what are your business critical priorities, really focus on that. So a lot of people, they will do things like, board meetings. I had a call with a CEO yesterday. I sat on their board, and they were preparing for their board meeting. And I'm like, look, I want you to not do any of the usual reporting and compliance stuff, because the reason we do a lot of board meetings, a lot of the board packs and the past information, and there's startups you'll have to prepare packs for investors, etc., is we believe that we can use past data to extrapolate your ability to do things in the future. That's all out the window. There is no way I can use any data from any of the companies right now to extrapolate how the businesses will do or what they should be doing over the next 3 or 4 months. Data is effectively useless. What I can do is ask them to create scenarios and stress tests for the future. And we as a board should really be looking at those scenarios that they create. So things like compliance, etc., all the box ticking events, that they are important, but right now, don't do them. Just you shouldn't be doing reporting. You should be doing future planning. So you need to have priorities. And the key things are you need to get more cash and reduce costs. And we'll talk about how you can do that, because that's an easy thing to say. Everything else can wait. Your role right now as people involved in business is to get more cash and reduce your costs. So one of the other actions I would like you to do immediately is really think through, what are the IP assets of your business? What is the business about? What is it you do? And IP, not just in terms of protectable IP, in terms of patents, etc., but what is the magic? If somebody was to buy your business, what is the magic that they're buying? So I really need you to think about that, because that will help you pivot. That will help you think about the value your business is about, etc. Get closer to your customers. You will experience churn. I was involved in a very stressful situation during the terrorist incidents in London in July 2005, and I was in a leadership role at a transportation company. And what you have to do is decide which customers you're going to service. And we decided to focus on 2 customers out of something like 300 because of the capacity issues. That ended up being the right thing to do. Get close to your customers, decide which customers you're going to look after more than anybody else if you do have supply chain constraints, etc., etc. You need to do that. Recognize that there will be need for break clauses in contracts. More your clients will ask for break clauses. More landlords are finding out that their tenants are asking for break clauses as circumstances X, Y, and Z happens. Think about, and again, we've alluded to this already, some of the stuff Erin is doing and Pat is doing in terms of pizza meetings, obviously not pizza meetings, but something like that. That there is real value in people having meals together. I'm having lunch meetings over Zoom with people, where the only thing that's changed is we're not having lunch together, but we're having lunch. And the great thing about that is you have complete control of the menu, so you can't say I don't like what's on the menu here. And I can't stress enough the need to take care of yourself. You really are no good to anyone if you're not at your 100%. If you're not at your best, you're no good. And like I said, preserve your energy. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It really is not a sprint. Be ready, take care of yourself, take the usual exercises that you need to do, all of that stuff. Very, very, very important. As the CEO, as the leader of your organization, as I said, you need to project calm. You need to project truth. A lot of people will get found out in this. I think actually, just making a wider point, I've been very, very impressed with some people in their leadership, and I've been very disappointed with others in leadership roles in the way they've responded to this crisis. They're just like all over the place. So project calm, project truth, communicate regularly, and avoid the temptation to say, right, we're not doing that anymore, we're going to do this. Get back to your mission. Yes, pivot your strategy. Yes, pivot your tactics, but don't pivot your mission. Don't pivot the reason why people joined your organization. Don't pivot the reason why people invested in your business. Get back to the mission, because critically, you cannot become something new overnight. You just can't. Nobody will believe you. Loads of people are thinking, oh, should we do e-learning? Because e-learning is apparently a big thing right now. And e-learning is actually a very, very difficult thing to do well. And it's loads and loads of people are doing it, but only very few people do it well. So stay good at what you're actually already good at. talking more about the immediate actions. So this is the third bit of this presentation, which is about the immediate actions. The first bit was all about stress, how you can manage that. This bit is all about the immediate actions. Cash. The key metric for me during a crisis, during the financial meltdown. So I actually launched a fund management business during the financial crisis because there were so many great viable businesses that just needed balance sheet strengthening to become viable. So that's the business I started in 2008, and the business is still running. It's called Flight and Partners. And the key metric now, back then was, and is now coming back into focus, is what is your runway? So if there's only one question I'm going to ask CEOs of companies I've invested in, it is, what is your runway? So the critical thing you have to do is extend your runway to around 12 months, ideally 6 to 9 months. So ideally 12, but 6 to 9 months, because this crisis is going to be with us for the foreseeable future. So then the question is, where does the extension come from? Well, one of the things you should do is look at how do you migrate to a lower cost model. Using force majeure, there are contracts, etc., that you should be able to exit. You really need to rapidly move towards a lower cost model. There is a truckload of state aid available. Your best friends right now should be ACOA and Innovation PEI. I've got NSBI there, my apologies. This was a presentation I delivered in Nova Scotia, but Innovation PEI, ACOA, the banks, credit unions, whatever. You really should be having regular conversations with people who can assist and aid you. And again, people at Startup Zone could aid you with all of the programs available, the 75% wage subsidy that will be available. Some of you, not all. It doesn't really cater to startups because you have to demonstrate a 30% drop in revenue. Details are still being worked out, but we need to do something on that. The other thing you can do to extend your runway is you need to cut early. You need to cut your costs early, but do be strategic about what you do. And don't just simply take the intention, right, everything across the board needs to be cut by 20%. Go back to the business model canvas, which is what are the key activities? What are the key things we do really, really well? What could we outsource? What could we reduce costs on? What could we exit without sacrificing the core nub of what we do? So do cut all the surrounding areas, but don't cut the core thing of what you do. And you've got to manage your payments. Use the force majeure thing. So when the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic, it became an act of God. So in China, one of the interesting things was when this crisis first emerged in China, there is an office in China because there's a lot of court cases going on between Chinese suppliers and their American customers. And the Chinese companies were using force majeure to come out the contracts. And the American courts were not recognizing this crisis as an act of God. And there was an office in China which actually issued force majeure certificates. So there were literally an office which said this is an act of God. So now that it's a pandemic, it is accepted that this is an act of God. So use that to your advantage and ask yourself key questions about what is your gross burn and what is your net burn. Because right now you can't really manage your revenues. The only thing you can manage is your cost. I've already mentioned about getting very close to Innovation PEI and getting close to ACOA. Get close to other providers of capital and make sure you're constantly asking them for advice. I can tell you as somebody who invests in companies, the thing I hate are surprises. Let me know well in advance what's on the horizon, what's coming up. So we're now going to look at the how do we explore the environment through an exercise called Steeple. But before then, are there any other questions or anything on what we've covered in the first two sections, which were the immediate actions you should take and the monitoring the stress levels? Are there any questions?
Nothing in the chat so far.
Good. Okay. All good. I'm assuming people will speak up if and when they need to. So, there was Shell began this thing called scenario planning in the 1970s, and they just got their management teams together and they created what would happen if. If you think about it, we all do fire drills, and yet very few of us are involved in a fire. It's just we recognize that the worst time to be learning how to escape a fire is in the middle of a fire. So we do this all the time. If you think about law firms, a lot of law firms create scenarios for you. If X and Y happen, then this will happen. If this happens, then this happens. So that's what they do. So Steeple was a way of, how do we make this more dynamic? How do we quickly give our managers tools to quickly and robustly create new scenarios for the future? And this is where this started. So it is a method to scan the environment. It is a way to see what impact changes can have. Sorry, my apologies. It's a way of measuring what impact changes will have on your key stakeholders in your business. Understand how those changes will actually change your business. And of course, these changes will change your value proposition. And how do you, bring that into play? Normally, I would do a Steeple analysis with companies on a tailored basis, and I spend a lot of time doing this. This presentation actually came together because I spent half an hour with a company called Talem Health in Cape Breton. Because one of the jobs I do is I'm mentoring residents in Cape Breton, and I work with startup companies. So Talem Health, what they do is they, if there's an accident involving two cars, they can just take the reports, and eventually they're moving towards where they can just look at the photographs of the accident and work out, using the algorithm and very deep expertise they have, exactly what the bill for the physio will be by just reading a report or looking at photographs of accidents. So I just want to explain what they do, just so you can understand the Steeple analysis. So then we looked at social changes. So if you think about their business, it is driven by, if you pardon the pun, it is driven by the number of people on roads, because that is directly related to the number of accidents. So first question is, and this is a question for all of you in the business that you will run, will people change their behavior? We did this analysis with Talem, and we think people will drive a lot more. I think people will not want to fly. Certainly, say, normally I would always drive between Halifax and Charlottetown. I'd normally always fly. Now I suspect I'll be driving. Equally, when I go up to Cape Breton, traditionally I would always be flying, but now I'll probably drive. So there will be more driving. Now, one of the things we do know from 9/11 is that in the 3 years after 9/11, as a direct result of the increased number of cars on the road, there were more people died in accidents than were killed on 9/11 in the 3 years following 9/11. So there are perverse effects to this. One thing we already know is through social distancing and everything else, the mortality rate around the world has actually dropped. So if we were just planning things, more people would have died than have died because of coronavirus than last year, because of the measures we are all taking, such as social distancing, etc. And reduced reduced pollution levels has really cleared the air. It's staggering to see what's happening in China in terms of the air quality, pollution monitoring, etc. So we think people will drive more when it comes back to Talem. So we think there'll be more accidents. We also think, because we do have evidence, that people are buying a lot more alcohol. In PEI, you saw the impact when the government announced that they were going to shut stores. So we think people are going to drink more, and they'll drink earlier and earlier in the day, because the routineness and the discipline of the day has just dropped. So, and we think driving will be spread throughout the day. So we think there'll be more driving and through social changes, and we think there'll be more drinking. So we think there may be more drink-related accidents. Then we think about changes which are enabled by technology. Now, in the past, automation has meant replacing, labor. It's not been a friendly word, automation. Now, if you think about the language around automation, it's very different. Automation is now a key value proposition, because automation now means enabling safety and social distancing. We've all been amazed at how many stores now don't want to handle cash. It's interesting in the UK how even drug dealers in the UK, illegal drug dealers, don't want to handle cash because they're worried about coronavirus. So it's phenomenal, these changes that have been brought about, that everybody now wants tap only. They don't even want to, put in your PIN number. The other thing is, a lot of businesses will have a lot of pent up demand. a lot of pent up demand. And when you think of that pent up demand, a lot of businesses will struggle to cope with when all the customers do come back. So one of the things that technology can show is that it can enable scale. And that is going to be critical. So all of this suggests that your value proposition might change. And technology, the clever and smart deployment of technology, can protect your margins. So we use this with Talem to suggest, because we expect for other reasons as well, we expect there to be a big increase in the demand on insurance companies with claims being made. Because of that, we thought that the automation tool, the enabling scale tool, and using different language around how we do the value proposition around automation would really help them get more clients quickly. We wanted to do a very long-term steeple as well, and we said one of the threats to the Talem business model is if the whole world went self-driving, there may be a huge reduction in the number of accidents. So that is not necessarily good for their business. Then we look at the economic changes. Now, all of you need to do this for your own business. You need to do this exercise. And again, like I said, I will be at the startup zone. If any of you want to use me to do this with you on your individual models, we can do that through sessions arranged through Erin and Rachel. Let's look at the economic changes. Now, we do know that levels of traffic are associated with economic activity. Now, there will be far lower levels of activity because of economic activity. And even when economic activity does come back online, it's going to be slow to get back up to where it was. So we do expect there to be lower levels of traffic. But on the other side, we also do know that gas prices have never been lower. So there will be this interesting balancing between the higher levels of driving because of low gas prices and the lower levels of traffic. We can also look at data and show that in the past, when there's high unemployment and low levels of economic activity, there tends to be a massive spike in the level of false claims where people claim they've been involved in an accident and they have huge physio bills. So there's a huge kind of fraud thing that takes place during periods of economic downturns. So again, the value proposition for Talem changes that they can actually help the insurance sector by saying we can rapidly cap or reject claims by looking at the reports. Environmental changes. These changes are going to be here permanently. They are changes that we all need to be very, very aware of. And these changes will be permanent. I think the way we do business will change because people are seeing the benefits of lower carbon already. So one of the things you need to do is think about your solution. Think about, does your solution reduce the amount of carbon? Does it reduce human interactions? Does it aid working remotely? So one of the spin-offs of this, and this is particularly pertinent to Prince Edward Island, is if you think about snow days, in the past, whenever we had a snow day, everything would just shut down. Schools would shut down. We would have this thing where you get storm chips, something I have to explain to my English friends what storm chips are. We would wear our PJs all day and play board games, and it was written off as a day. I now think because of what we've just been through collectively as Canadians, I think my prediction is that I think the way we handle snow days will change. We are now equipped and used to working from home, and we will just, okay, this is what we're going to do with the kids, this is what we're going to do with food, this is what we're going to do, this is what the day looks like, boom. And I expect snow days to not now be associated with lower levels of productivity. So think about, you really need to think about your business and think about, well, let me do a steeple analysis on my business, on my industry. I'm just looking at the motor industry and the automation industry, but I'm not looking at your business. So all of you have your own businesses and you do need to do this exercise to do that. Now let's think about political changes. Now the US is the biggest market. Now it's very interesting what's happening with the US, especially with the CARES Act, which just got passed, and it's incredible how much detail that was in that legislation. But from a Talem point of view, we think insurance companies will be bailed out. If insurance companies suffer huge losses, they'll be bailed out. The other thing we expect is that anti-monopoly legislation will be strengthened, because one of the fears of Talem was that actually, because of the way the industry is working, insurance companies might end up merging and we might end up with one or two big giants. I actually think governments around the world are very concerned that there'll be some companies with huge balance sheets, very strong balance sheets, that will end up swallowing up competition and end up, merging. I actually don't think that's a threat anymore, because anti-monopoly legislation will be, in my opinion. If I was a lawyer, I'd really look at competition law, because I think that will be strengthened. The other thing, and there's a precedent in the UK for this, and this came as a direct result of the financial crisis of 2008, I think disruptive technologies will be encouraged. Now, just after 9/11, the other shock to the financial system was the collapse of Anderson Consulting, brought about by fraud at WorldCom and at the energy company whose name escapes me, based in Texas. So Enron. So because of Enron and WorldCom, there was huge fraud. So one of the big 5 accounting firms collapsed. The government were very concerned about the impact the concentration of just 4 big accounting giants had on the sector. So they wanted to, they did analysis and said banking was very similar. So what they did in the UK was the Financial Conduct Authority, they deliberately tried to create very friendly conditions for startups in fintech, because disruptive technologies were absolutely encouraged. Anything that disrupted the giants and the incumbents was to be encouraged. My view is that right now, if Facebook today tried to buy WhatsApp or tried to buy Instagram, they would probably be blocked. They're just lucky that they did those mergers when the climate was very different. Right now, they'd be blocked. And I wouldn't be surprised if within 2 or 3 years, those companies are forced to break up. But this is great news for startups. I think startups will be provided with shields where if they are disrupting incumbents, it will be encouraged. We've already seen how supply chains, the concentration of supply chains has fragmented because of the tension between the US and China. And I think, if anything, this is going to accelerate the need for companies to have diversified supply chains where they would rather pay slightly more for products, slightly more for the supply chain, but built in a bit of latency. Finally, we looked at the legal changes that we think would affect Talem Health. And again, all of you will face different legal issues. We think there's always going to be better safety standards for cars, but the irony is that as we get better and better safety standards for cars, we get more and more accidents because people feel bolder and people feel less risk sensitive. So there are more collisions, but those collisions tend to not result in fatalities. So from a Talem point of view, in terms of physio costs, etc., better safety for standards for cars, ironically, is a kind of good thing. The other thing we think will happen as a result of this, and because of cash flow issues that everybody's experiencing, a lot of legal firms may be under pressure. There may be a lot of pressure on insurance companies to pay and process claims quicker. And one of the ways insurance companies may compete in the future is how many days it takes on average to settle a claim. How do we turn these plans into actions? Very key thing for all of us. And I think the interesting thing is that you really do have to, all of you have to think about how does it change your immediate value proposition. I would encourage you all to revisit your business model canvas. And actually, for those of you who are members of Startup Zone, on Thursday, we are doing a workshop on the business model canvas. So I think I would encourage those of you who are on this session to really do your sleep analysis before we do the business model canvas, so you can revisit what your value proposition is and how things have changed and how you need to make sure your business model accommodates those changes. And then you've got to think about, how can we test that new value proposition? Are there some lean tests? Are there some split experiments that you can do? Are there some thought leadership papers you can actually produce that you share in the industry? And critically, you've got to find a way to create urgency through those trigger points. So that is actually, we're slightly ahead of schedule. That is me done. So I'm happy if you'd like to, if you can turn on your microphones again, and feel free to turn on your videos, and we can have a bit of a chat, and just I'd love to have some participation and some comments and a live chat.
Amazing. Permjot, I had a question for you as people
Yeah.
get themselves together and have any questions. But you mentioned you're seeing two types of people, two types of CEOs, those that are managing well with this, those that aren't. And you kind of highlighted some points. Is there anything else that you could sort of talk about that, you're seeing that you could maybe say, maybe you shouldn't be doing that? Or is there any glaring things that you're seeing with those people who are doing things you're like, that's not great, that people could be aware of?
I think a lot of people are, a lot of people, there was a company in the UK, a fashion company, a fashion startup. And then what they were doing was they were doing things like the first 1,000 customers who order a dress will get a free hand sanitizer.
Right.
Don't do that.
Right.
Don't do that. So, and then even, I hate to crap all over them, but even the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, they did a thing where companies were doing a COVID-19 discount. They were doing a 15% discount on certain products to help us through COVID-19. Don't do that. Don't do that. Either people want your product and it's got some relation to COVID-19. So a funny thing is I saw a clothing company, they did an advert saying, they talked about working from home and they said working from home is no excuse to not look smart. So they did look smart thing. And I thought it was funny because they indirectly talked about COVID-19 in terms of people are working from home and it's no excuse to open up your Skype calls on wearing pajamas, wear nice clothes at home. So that to me was getting the tone right, but a lot of people get the tone wrong.
Right.
If you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to be very, very careful about how you do this. And a good example where, and it's more than just marketing, it's about the way you talk to your staff.
Absolutely, yeah.
Be sensitive, understand people are going through stress and everybody deals with stress in a very, very different way.
Yeah, good stuff, okay.
Permjot, are there any other social changes that you think will stick through this period after that, like you'd like to talk about in and outside of business?
Oh, I think loads. I think the covenant between industry, I think the way we view business will change permanently. The way we view social distancing will change. The way we view events will change. The way we view restaurants will change. The question is whether these changes will be very, very long term or just short term. And also the changes are if this period is extended over a very long period of time. I actually think one of the things with dating, I think dating will change. So dating is already, because two things are happening. One is the popularity of Love is Blind. Yep, I'm up with my youth culture. I've watched Love is Blind, so I'm with it. But one of the things about Love is Blind is it's all about, and things go back. Things always go back. It's very circular. So one thing is Love is Blind encourages people to get to know each other before they date. And I think loads of people are now dating online, where they're actually having dinner dates and stuff, and loads of apps have integrated that. So I think the way people get to know each other will change. The way people want to get to know your brand, be it clothing, will change. And those changes will be very subtle, and you've got to be very careful that you are on message and are on point, but not exploiting the situation. There was another company that I got an email from which said, every cloud has a silver lining, we have a sale. And that backfired on me big time because I just thought, no, that is horrible. There is no silver lining. I wasn't thinking, oh, I hope we have this pandemic which kills tens of thousands of people so I can get a 15% discount on my polo tops. Nobody thinks like that. So I think, yes, to answer your question, there'll be lots of social changes. We don't know whether they'll be permanent or not, but I see that in the way, particularly youth culture changes. I think the way we are accelerating the use of video technology, we are accelerating the way people think about each other. I think some people will exploit that to increase xenophobia. I think that's the dark side that makes me very nervous. I think one of the reasons why the issue is as problematic as it is because we don't actually have a world leader. Even if you look at the role Stephen Harper played, along with Gordon Brown so it doesn't matter about the political persuasion, Barack Obama, during the financial crisis, lots of leaders got together to say, We need a global solution for this. We did have that with the way the global community got together to stop the dollar rising, but we haven't. If there is to be a global lockdown, it would have been far better had the world got together and said, the global lockdown will be for 4 weeks and it begins on this day and it ends on this day. Whereas everybody having their own schedule and their own calendar for lockdowns doesn't actually work if you think it through. So Canada could come out of its lockdown period with 0 new infections, but we would have to remain sealed to the United States until they achieve the same outcome. We'd have to stay sealed to France, the UK, Italy, etc., until they achieve the same outcome. So it would have been far better had the world coordinated and said, in a week's time, in 3 days' time, the world will come to lockdown. So I think my depression almost is that the world has not come together and everyone is putting their own country first. One of the things that countries around the world have done is they've actually asked for their people to come back home. It's the worst thing you could have done. It would have been far better for the Canadian government to have said to Canadians in Australia, hey, Australian government, could you please take care of our Canadians? We will pay the bill. Equally, if there are any Australians in Canada, please stay in Canada. We will take care of you. We will pay your bill. We'll pay for your healthcare. We will sort this out with your government afterwards. Instead, what we've done is we've quickly rushed people from all kinds of places to come back home. It's kind of like a lack of, anyway, that's a different, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. That's a different thing.
It's an interesting perspective. No, it's good. It's good.
I was supposed to fly to Australia on Saturday, but won't be making it this winter, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, you know, people are, and the thing that's making Air Canada and airlines nervous is people realize they don't need to fly as much as they do. Because a lot of people are experiencing their income is dropping, but their costs are dropping even faster.
Yeah, and so, I mean, last couple of minutes, I'm not sure if anybody else has anything. Permjot, I know you had mentioned if people are looking for details on sort of the provincial and federal processes, you know, the chamber has some really good outlines of information on their website that you can check out. We obviously have our resources too for those at the startup zone. So lots of resources there to reference. And then I guess we got a question from Amy here.
I think there are lots of industries, Amy. That's a great question. I think you have to do your own steeple analysis on that. But I think a lot of companies will do very well. I've mentioned Talem Health. I think clearly any business involved in video conferencing is doing well. Any business that increases automation, I think financial services online have done well. Anything that is disruptive to large incumbents will now have a shelter. So there are loads and loads of things that I actually think will potentially do well, but you've got to do your own analysis. And also critically, Amy, the question is, what industry are you in, Amy? If you unmute and feel free to speak.
Just with the chamber.
Oh, with chamber. So I think there are lots of businesses, and I think business by business, if we did a sector by sector, and even businesses that you may think initially are not good in you know, this crisis is not good for, like restaurants. There are some restaurants that the restaurant sector is doing. The eating away from home, it depends how you classify it. The eating away from home sector will still be okay because, so for example, in the UK, one of the biggest concerns with shutting down schools was that a lot of low-income children, the only hot, nutritious meal of the day they get is in schools. So one of the reasons why England was reluctant in London to shut down schools was, how do we feed the poor? So what you're seeing in Nova Scotia, what you're seeing in other places are lots of restaurants are now being kept open by catering to low-income families. And one of the things you've got to do as a business is pivot quickly. So restaurants that have remained high-end restaurants, they're clearly going to have a horrendous time right now. One of the things they've done in Nova Scotia, which the US did, was they relaxed the rules allowing alcohol to be do takeout with alcohol. So the point I'm making is, even if you take a view like a restaurant, if you were able to pivot quickly enough, I actually think, ironically, I think Skip the Dishes is going to have a horrendous time, actually, which might go against the grain. But I think what's going to happen is, if you're a restaurant and you are paying $500 a week to Skip the Dishes, you don't mind if you're doing well and they're doing well and it forms 10% of your business. But actually, if you're now handing over $2,000 a week to Skip the Dishes and your turnover, your revenue, everything is massively down, you're going to look to renegotiate that. And nobody likes to think that while I'm suffering, my service provider is doing very well. So I hope that answers your question in more detail than you probably envisaged, Amy. But I think even industries that you think would benefit, like Skip the Dishes, I think in the long run won't benefit because of the way they've handled this. And if you can almost disrupt the disruptor, like there's a company called it's based in Cape Breton, and I've forgotten the name. Click to order. Yeah, Click to order. Sorry. They'll do very well because their model disrupts the Skip the Dishes model. So even if you look at startups, I think people will crop up that can disrupt the disruptors. And so I think, because their model is different, they don't take a percentage, they take a fixed fee, and they provide extra services, da 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 da. And I think people will actually switch from Skip the Dishes to low-cost disruptors like that. Sorry, I hope that answers the question, Amy, and more.
What was that business again, Permjot? Click to order service?
Click to order, yeah. So I think the point, I'm using the restaurant example as the restaurant sector as an example that everyone would say, oh my God, they're done. The cinema industry, you would say, is horrific, but the cinema industry now has to reinvent itself in terms of, how about allowing people to have cinema experiences in the home? How about cinemas design? If I was in the cinema industry, I'd say, how do I design a laptop? How do I design hardware that enables a home cinema experience, and whereby people can subscribe and pay a fortune to subscribe? So I send them the hardware for free. I'm just thinking this off the top of my head. I subscribe, I get this really expensive piece of hardware with headphones and everything that gives me a beautiful cinema experience, right? That I can have with my family at home. Because that traditional model of going and being in a confined space with loads of other people, that I suspect for the foreseeable future is going to struggle. But they need to reinvent themselves and think of, how can I use technology? Because people still want video entertainment and they still want cinema quality. And the worst thing cinemas could do is say, we're now going to compete with Netflix, or we're going to compete with Disney Plus, because they've lost that one. But if they could somehow try and compete with providing a cinema experience at home, they might just win.
Is that what you're seeing, Aaron? Is that what we can expect at City Cinema?
Here's hoping.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, Permjot, some industries we've been looking at, agriculture, I mean, restaurants and takeout, that's a really interesting space. A lot of people fighting for whatever they can and pivoting. Healthcare, like you mentioned, anyone dealing with transportation, that can be 50-50. It could be really good. It could be really bad. Chatbots, security, monitoring, all these sorts of pieces seem to be becoming more and more active from what we can tell within our community. And that, health encompasses so much. I think health right now is going to become huge. Mental health, especially. I know you brought up a lot of points.
You've got to be careful that you don't exploit it, and you've got to be careful that you. So I always think of Starbucks. When Starbucks started, there's no way you'd have invested in Starbucks, because if you looked at coffee consumption was down. So the number one coffee brand was Nescafe by a long way. Like they had something like 84% market share, like huge. Why would you enter a market where 84% of people have instant coffee, which costs them 7 cents a cup? No. What we're going to do is we're going to create a brand, and instead of paying 7 cents and having coffee whenever you want, you're going to line up in this place called Starbucks, and you're going to pay $3. You're going to pay $3 for something you can have for 7 cents. But what Starbucks did, Starbucks recognized, they did a steeple analysis, and they actually recognized what was going on in the bigger picture, and they recognized the need for the third space. And coffee was just something that enabled the third place to happen. And they deliberately had 3 levels of seating, because they've realized that if you have 3 levels of seating, you break up the line, you break up the thing, and you create a space where people want to work. Whereas if you had 1 level of seating, it would be a canteen. If you had 2 levels of seating, it'd be awkward. So they deliberately had 3 levels of seating. So what I mean is they used lots of clever analysis to take advantage of, and they transformed it. They were never about a place to drink coffee. They were always about something else. And I think cinemas and all these other businesses need to reinvent themselves. And you won't benefit just by saying, oh, we're in the health case. You've got to do something clever. Anyway, I hope that's useful. I think I like to finish on time because I want to respect everybody's time. But thank you very much, everybody, for that. And I hope to see many of you on our session on Wednesday and on Thursday.
Excellent. Thanks, Permjot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed. All the best. Bye for now.